We are proud to have launched the Philadelphia Research Initiative, and while I'm here to get the accolades, I want to identify Don Kimmelman. This was his vision, Don, for his leadership. In addition to being his vision, he masterfully recruited Larry Eichel to run this program. There is no one that I know that is more passionate about this city, more pragmatic, and more professional in his role as a journalist and now as a leader of this program.
I'm Larry Eichel, the project director of the Philadelphia Research Initiative, and I'm here to do two things. The first is to recognize the people most responsible for this report. They are Claire Shubik-Richards, Senior Associate at the Philadelphia Research Initiative, and Don Steeman, Assistant Professor of Criminology at Loyola University of Chicago. Claire and Don, please stand. And I also wanted to give you a brief overview of our report. We at the Philadelphia Research Initiative set out to answer a few basic questions. Why did the population of the Philadelphia prison system rise so much for so long? Why has it declined in the past year? Is what we're seeing sustainable without jeopardizing public safety? And what will be the impact on the taxpayers? One of the most striking findings in our report is the significant rise in the prison population over the last decade, which you see there, took place at a time when the number of adult arrests in Philadelphia was relatively stable, trending lower. In other words, there was no direct relationship between the size of Philadelphia's prison population and the number of arrests. So what then determined the size of the population? Before I start to answer that question, some background may be helpful. Despite the name, what we have in Philadelphia is a system of jails, not prisons. Generally speaking, a prison is a state institution used for the confinement of individuals serving sentences of 2 years or more. Our jail system, though, has basically three types of inmates. Individuals held prior to trial, individuals convicted of crimes and sentenced to a period of incarceration of less than 2 years, and individuals held for alleged or proven violations of their conditions of probation or parole. Now, a violation may consist of missing a meeting with a probation officer or of committing a new crime. Back to the size of the jail population. It is a function of the number of inmates admitted and the length of time they stay. The number of bed days consumed. One inmate who stays one day takes up one bed day. In the past decade, as you can see there, the annual number of bed days consumed in the Philadelphia prison system rose 38%. And for the most part, as the lower line shows, this increase was driven by a rise in the number of individuals held pre-trial. From 1999 through 2009, the number of bed days used by pre-trial inmates increased by 44%. In 2009, pre-trial inmates represented 57% of the population on any given day. For many of the inmates in this group, their jail stay is short, 7 days or less, while they put together the money to make bail. So why, you might ask, would pretrial inmates be taking up more beds if, as we saw before, arrests were not rising? Have the types of arrests been getting more serious? For the most part, no, although there were more arrests for drug possession and DUI. So what was happening? For one thing, bail amounts were going up, and fewer defendants were being set free without bail. In 2003 in Philadelphia, 46% of defendants were released on their own recognizance. Last year, that number was down to 40%. Contrast the use of bail today in Philadelphia, which you see there in the middle, to a couple other cities that are close by. New York City on the left, you see that 65% of the defendants are released without bail. In Washington, it's 85%. Even so, those cities report higher rates of defendants showing up for court which we know is a serious problem here. But though the increase in the pretrial population was the largest factor that fueled the long-term rise in Philadelphia's jail population, it wasn't the only one. Over the last decade, bed days consumed by probation and parole violators increased 70%. So what then accounts for the very real decline in the population over the last year? To a large degree, the decline has been the result of a drop in number of inmates serving sentences. This actually started a while back in 2003 when the city began developing some alternatives to incarceration. It accelerated in 2008 after passage of a state law that required inmates with sentences of 2 to 5 years who had been able to stay in the Philadelphia jails to go to state facilities instead. And this has helped, it's certainly not been the only factor, but it has helped fuel a decline in the population that began in January 2009 and continues to this day. So what does all of this mean for the city's future ability to safely and cost-effectively control the population? That's what this evening's panel is all about. In our report, we talk about what the city is doing now to manage its jail population. You heard some about that from the mayor. You'll hear more about it from our panelists. But I wanted to make brief mention of some policy options for the future suggested by what we saw that other jurisdictions are doing. 1, expanding options for diverting cases away from the courts. 2, revitalizing the bail guidelines to make them an effective tool for identifying which individuals can be released pre-trial with a high probability of their showing up for court. 3, creating a broader range of services to help individuals stay in the community pre-trial and again, make their court dates. 4, developing new responses to probation violators that don't rely so much on jail. And finally, with any of this, as with the policy innovations already underway, developing measures to track performance to make sure programs actually reduce the inmate population. With public safety in mind, the challenge is to do a better job of identifying those people who don't need to be in jail.